Hey folks, today I would like to talk about the extraordinary Kala Sarpa effect that's been in play for the last week or so. So, unless you've been living in a cave without internet or television, you know that Israel and the USA launched an attack on Iran on February 28th, Operation Epic Fury. So, the interesting thing about all this is the intersection of Kala Sarpa horoscopes on a national level, the chart of modern day Iran, on an event level, the actual day of the strike, first strike of Operation Epic Fury, and in the background, the natal horoscope of current President of the USA, Donald Trump. Now, as many of you may be aware, Kala Sarpa is a somewhat, contested configuration. Many people protest that because it does not appear in Shastra, that it has no real foundation in Jyotish Vedic astrology. And yet there's a counter argument to that. The primary one being that Kala Sarpa originated through an oral tradition of South India, where publication was far less active and likely than in northern India, which was always more industrialized and inclined to codify teachings in Shastra, in publications, in books, and so on and so forth. So Kala Sarpa being, kind of a handed down via oral tradition in South India, remained a kind of on a sort of a mythic, folkloric foundation. And yet, in the hands of my teacher, Hart Defoe, and some other practitioners, Kala Sarpa is a living, breathing, functional configuration in a horoscope. Now, a number of years ago, basically because I was interested in Kala Sarpa as an extraordinary pattern in the horoscope, which seemed to spook people because of its extraordinary you know reputation for the ability to cause harm or being more problematic than anything else, considered as a dosha rather than a yoga. And yet, at that point several years ago, I began to do research on Kala Sarpa, among my own clientele of some 3,000 horoscopes, in which I found, roughly 12%, 1 in 8. So it was about 400 horoscopes had a Kala Sarpa pattern. And I began to gather Kala Sarpa horoscopes from the general population as well, typically famous people whose birth data has been recorded, such that I get another 400 some horoscopes that way. And, looked at commonalities and researched whatever was available, what little was available in the literature and on the internet, and on the basis of notes from a workshop of my own teacher, I effectively, ultimately wrote a book on Kala Sarpa, which digs into all the various permutations and combinations, the various classes of Kala Sarpa, and whether rules of judgment as to whether it constitutes a yoga or a dosha, and the configuration whether the nodal axis runs through the first and seventh, or the second, the eighth houses, and so on and so forth. Well, maybe I hastened over one point. Kala Sarpa basically splits the horoscope in two via the nodal axis, and all the visible planets lie on one side of that axis, leaving the other side of the horoscope empty. If you can picture that in your mind's eye, it creates a kind of a lens-shaped or a bowl pattern. Alternatively, I've called it a draconic bowl in the context of Western astrology. But it has the effect of forming a kind of a lens or a magnifying glass, which arguably has the effect of magnifying whatever we find in that horoscope. Okay, so enough about kind of background. If you're interested, you can always pick up my book and read a whole lot more. Everything that you were afraid to ask about Kala Sarpa is all in that book. Okay, but let's get on to the topic du jour, which is Kala Sarpa in the horoscope of modern day Iran, in the horoscope of Operation Epic Fury, and in the horoscope of Donald Trump. Okay, so here's the horoscope for modern day Iran, which was on 1st of April 1979. Kala Sarpa pattern, let's note this. So there's your Rahu Ketu axis running through the second and the eighth houses. And there's a graha at either end of that axis. Saturn retrograde is on the Rahu Ketu axis, and Venus is at the other end of that axis. So within the horoscope, there's a few grahas of note. For instance, Jupiter forms a Hamsa Yoga because it's exalted in a Kendra. That's the most notable thing. I mean, there are other dignities here. The moon is exalted. Mercury is retrograde, therefore relatively bright. Saturn is retrograde, therefore distinctly bright. So what do we see in this horoscope? Quite briefly, we see the two Kshatriya grahas, Sun and Mars, occupying the ninth house. So you've got the Lord of the 10th and Sun, which is sort of a generic akaraka for leadership and administration. Those two are together in the ninth house of organized religion, spirituality, and they are in Sambandha with Jupiter, this powerful Jupiter forming Hamsa Yoga, which both aspects and disposits that cluster in the ninth house. So this is a sort of an excellent signature for the creation of a theocracy, the ruler of the ruling administration, which is bound by religious spiritual principles to govern as per their beliefs. So that's one thing. The other notable thing for in terms of sambandhas is that Saturn and Venus are in sambandha here because Saturn both aspects Venus by mutual aspect, but it also disposits it as well. Now, if you look at the what does Venus own, the fourth house and the 11th house, Saturn happens to aspect both of those. Saturn aspects the fourth house and the Lord of the fourth, Venus, which has gone to the eighth. Saturn also aspects the 11th and the Lord of the 11th, Venus, gone to the eighth. Now, keeping things simple, in the national horoscope, the fourth house represents the people. So Venus, representative of the people, has gone to the eighth house. That's, a negative factor. It therein lies upon the Rahu Ketu axis. That's quite destabilizing. And it is aspected by Saturn, aspected and disposed by Saturn. So, and at the same time, Saturn aspects the fourth house. So the fourth house, the people are very much negatively affected in this horoscope. The moon is aspected as well by Saturn and it occupies the 11th house. And both Moon and Venus, are representatives of the female population. So it's the generic population of the fourth house that is, sort of held under the thumb of an authoritarian government. And in particular, it's women that would seem to suffer most because both Venus, Lord of the fourth, and Moon, the Karaka for the fourth, are both afflicted by that very powerful Saturn, which is, given extra oomph by virtue of lying on the Rahu Ketu axis. So that's one thing. Now Iran is currently running Jupiter Dasha, but it's in the very last bhukti of Jupiter Dasha. That's Rahu Bhukti. Now, it's sometimes said that the last bhukti of Jupiter has quite a kick to it. That's just based on its being Rahu. Now, in this instance, Rahu in this horoscope is, monumental in terms of effect. Because Rahu forms with Ketu a Kala Sarpa yoga, which tends to, exaggerate, aggravate, amplify everything that exists in this horoscope. A couple of those things being, strict adherence, courtesy of Jupiter, strict adherence to, Islamic law, in the Shiite element of the Muslim faith. And its aspect and disposition of the grahas in the ninth house, simply adds fuel to that fire, sort of zealotry, if you like. And so Saturn is part and parcel of all this. So the last dasha of Rahu is Jupiter, where it sort of brings, all of this religious, spiritual zealotry and, heavy-handed control of the country on religious, spiritual principles to a head. What follows is the Rahu Bhukti. Iran is in it now. And of course, Rahu takes on the qualities of any graha with which it is associated or aspected or disposed. So the prime influence here, look, Rahu is associated with Saturn. That's one factor. It's aspected by Venus. That's another factor. It's disposed by the Sun. That's another factor. Of those three, which is the strongest? That would represent the most representative client, and it is Saturn. Because Saturn has, in retrogression, it's brighter than normal, and that's what we call a first-class strength. Whereas Venus is simply ordinary, likewise, so the Sun too is ordinary. So Rahu in its Bhukti is going to bring forth largely effects of Saturn. Saturn is the lord of the seventh, so it functions as a kind of a double maraka. Saturn occupies the second, rules the seventh. Those are both maraka houses, maraka shthanas. So Rahu invokes that. Saturn is also lord of the eighth house, which it aspects as well too. So this whole notion of, conflict with others, potential death and destruction, and revolution, scooping in the eighth house meanings, all of that comes on board in this Rahu Bhukti. And, here we are. If we move over and look at the first strike in the morning of February 28th, a Saturday, it was announced first on Iranian TV as taking place at 9:40. But there was a bit of a lag between the first strike and the reporting of that on national TV. A lot of commentators have since referred to that time, 9:40. But I happened to be lucky in catching a brief diagnosis by a American intelligence officer who said that the first attack actually came at 9:27 in the morning, which is the time that I'm using here. It's, it doesn't really matter a whole lot. It's 13 minutes in clock time, and that will change the amshas of the vargas, but I'm not getting into that here. So let's take this on face that it happened during an Aries rising in Tehran. And notice the Kala Sarpa configuration. We've got Rahu, Ketu splitting the chart in two, and most all of these planets lie on one side of Rahu, Ketu, even though Mars is like an outrider here just outside the degree of the nodal axis. It remains in the same sign as Rahu. So this functions as what we call a class 4 Kala Sarpa. So as here we have Kala Sarpa again. Now notice the coincidence of signs in the Iranian national chart of 1979. Rahu was in Leo, Ketu was in Aquarius. So here we see a sign inversion. Rahu and Ketu exchange or flip signs every, roughly 9.3 years, because the cycle of the nodal transit cycle is 18.6 years. So in half of that time, roughly, they will, flip signs. But, I say roughly because we're not trying to detect a degree-to-degree duplication or inversion. So it's really just roughly 9 years have passed before Rahu Ketu will be in the opposite signs than they were at birth. And then thereafter, every 18.5 years, there will be a recurrence of that. So it just happens to be a coincidence, yes, or a meaningful coincidence. That Rahu and Ketu are back in the opposite signs that they were at the birth of modern day Iran, and there happens to be a Kala Sarpa configuration at the same time. That is a coincidence, but I'm stressing here a meaningful coincidence. So let's have a look. As far as a kind of a muhurta for an attack, I mean, this is not bad. The ascendant Lord Mars is in the 11th house. The Sun, too, is in the 11th house. And, well, the Moon as being a joint significator for the American-Israeli coalition, being in its own sign, that's a plus, I guess. There's this huge cluster of grahas in the sign of Aquarius, but if you flip back to the modern Iran chart, that huge cluster appears in the 8th house. That's not such a great sign. That's a lot of transit in the 8th house and the activation of, significant disruption, revolution, transformation, overthrow, all of these adjectives we might throw at it. So back to this. Not a bad muhurta, but there are problems in here as well too. So who do we take as significator here? I mean, we know it's an American-Israeli coalition, and at the outset we might have assumed that, well, okay, does Mars represent America because America is the bigger dog in this fight, accompanying Israel in the attack on Iran? And we might first assume that Mars represents America, and the 3rd house could represent the brother in arms, Israel. But in a press conference a couple days after the first strike, Marco Rubio let slip something along the lines that we knew that Israel was going to attack Iran, and as soon as Iran was attacked by any quarter, they were going to retaliate, at anyone who was on Israel's side. Israel, obviously, but also America as Israel's chief ally in the Middle East. Therefore, Iran's thinking was we'll hit them both. But now, in hindsight, looking at Rubio's comments, that sounds like Israel was the real instigator of this strike, of Operation Epic Fury, and it's the USA that's kind of going along for the ride. In that case, Mars becomes the significator for Israel as Lord of the Ascendant, the real driver of the strike and the opening of the war. And America then is now signified by the brother in arms, 3rd Lord Mercury. Now, here's a problem. Mercury and Venus are in planetary war. The minutes of this are just off the chart in this, but we can look over here in the South Indian chart and see Mercury at 2801, Venus at 2803. Well, they are really and truly in planetary war by degree. So who is who now? So if the instigator is indicated by the 1st house, that's the American-Israeli coalition, then the 7th house will represent Iran, so represented by Venus. No problem there. So if we go back and review this, we'll say Mars rules Israel as a motivating force in the strike, and Mercury represents the USA as comrade in arms, and Venus represents Iran. So we have Venus and Mercury entangled in planet Graha Yuddha, planetary war, wherein Mercury represents the USA and Venus represents Iran. Now, what's the upshot of all this? Well, there are rules for, well, first things first. In a war, there's collateral damage of every kind, and there is no real winner. Everybody suffers. I mean, we can take that as a basic premise. War, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing. But we can try to, get a little more nuance out of this by digging deeper into this Graha Yuddha. Venus and Mercury. Who's the winner of such a war? Well, the rules for determining the winner, technical winner of Graha Yuddha are 3 in this order: brightness, elevation, and relative speed. Now, Venus is definitely brighter than Mercury, and I could take you to a table to prove that in terms of its, luminosity and visibility at the time of this event. Take my word for it, Venus is the winner, and we could stop right there and say, well, that's it, that's all. But it's not that simple. Mercury happens to be higher in declination, more elevated, in other words, than Venus, and that gives it some brownie points in that regard. But yet Venus is also moving relatively faster. You see, Mercury is in retrograde motion, Venus is in direct motion, and moving faster than its average speed. So on two different scores, brightness and speed, Venus is the winner of this war. But whoa, wait a second, what does that mean? Venus represents Iran. So does that mean that Venus is going to beat the USA in this particular engagement? Well, no, let's be real, because, in terms of sheer firepower, control of the skies after day one, and the ability to strike at will with little opposition, Israel and USA have, they're holding most of the cards. And yet, Iran has, by some count, something like 20,000 plus drones at their disposal. X number of missiles, and who knows how many sleeper cells embedded throughout the Western world. I mean, the mind recoils at the possibilities. So, but in this particular engagement, if we were to leave it just within the sphere of the Middle East, we could say, okay, America and Israel are going to rule the skies, and they've got just so much, firepower in terms of air force, naval force, and even, the ability to put boots on the ground. This is, huge. But Iran has a lot in store as well, too. So what does that mean in this context? Well, for one thing, this might seem like, okay, it's been a great week from the point of view of the Pentagon and the IDF, but, it's not over. And, American intelligence officials or Pentagon officials have already said, this could go 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks or whatever. But you know what? Nobody knows. So on the basis of the strength for Venus in this planetary war, I believe that Iran has a lot up its sleeve that can continue for quite some time. We'll see how long that might be. Looking forward down the road, in the fall of 2027, in the national horoscope of Iran, they will enter into the Saturn Dasha. Now, Saturn Dasha is going to be pretty problematic because it's highlighted by virtue of being on the Rahu Ketu axis. Remember, everything gets amplified, expanded under a Kala Sarpa configuration. And the Saturn is intimately tied to that Kala Sarpa pattern, and so it can loom larger than a Saturn Dasha typically would. But Saturn is powerful. It is a double Maraka, as I pointed out earlier, and it also rules the 8th house. So the notion of, pending revolution, overthrow of the existing regime, death and destruction from external forces indicated by the 7th, anything is possible. So, that is a couple of years away. So a lot could happen in that time. Okay, last thing I want to discuss, Donald Trump's chart. So here we have a Kala Sarpa running through the 4th and the 10th. Here the moon lies just outside the Rahu Ketu axis, so this too is a class 4. In fact, I think every one of those is. This one, I already talked about the strike. In the Iran chart, Venus lies outside the axis as well too. So each one of these is a class 4, the most common of the Kala Sarpa configurations. So Donald Trump has a Kala Sarpa as well, different signs, Taurus, Scorpio. But Sambandha exists here in a big way too. Mars aspects the moon and disposits the moon And this moon is fraught with very mixed conditions. It's a full moon, but it's also a lunar eclipse. Yeah, the moon has Digbala, but the moon is also debilitated. So this is a hugely complicated moon, and Mars aspect upon it and uh, dispositing of the moon makes for an extremely volatile and aggressive personality. And I'm not telling anybody anything they don't already know. But the martial kind of disposition is very much, present and accounted for in almost all interactions Trump has with his enemies, with his sometimes friends, with people who used to be his friends. I mean, he's always in attack mode, pretty much. So Mars is, a kind of a focal planet in this configuration. And what's interesting by transit, the Rahu Ketu transit at the time of Operation Epic Fury, that Rahu Ketu alignment runs through his first and seventh houses, which sort of, aggravates everything about relationships. Relations writ small on a personal level, a social level, and on a national or international level in terms of diplomacy. So that Mars is aggravated by the Rahu Ketu axis that's transiting through his first and seventh house. And Mars at the time of Operation Epic Fury is almost exact to the degree opposite from his natal Mars. So it's a kind of a double whammy on that Mars, which brings out, sort of the aggressive instincts, the warlike posturing, and, everything else that seems to be on board for the last few months in the Trump administration. Coincidentally, all of this comes to bear in Operation Epic Fury. 3 Kala Sarpas all converging in one. Modern day Iran with Kala Sarpa running through Leo Aquarius. Operation Epic Fury with a Kala Sarpa running through Aquarius Leo, and Donald Trump's horoscope with Kala Sarpa running through Taurus Scorpio, but the transiting nodal axis running through his first and seventh house. So it's a monumental kind of collision of Kala Sarpa energy all coming at the same time. And as we've already seen, the whole notion of amplification and expansion beyond borders, where the sort of adjectives we use to talk about the Kala Sarpa configuration itself, that it amplifies or exaggerates everything that you see. Now even we see this at play in the real world, where what might have been a limited strike and a containment within Iran has already exploded beyond Iran's borders into all the Gulf states. The collateral damage is significant, and it's very damaging to others of these Gulf states. Think of Dubai alone, which has been sort of a vacation destination that's growing in magnitude for the last several years, and suddenly hotels and resorts and stuff are under the active threat of drones and missiles from Iran. Partly because these Gulf states have been hosts to American air bases and other, American presence, which Iran is calling those Gulf states out for and saying you've become collateral damage because you're allowing yourself to be springboards for, aggressive action against the state of Iran. Stand down and we'll stop doing that to you. Anyway, God knows where this is going to go, but it's got the potential to snowball, sort of a curious analogy to use in the Middle East, a place of desert and heat, but so it goes. Anyway, stay tuned. I'm going to follow this particular post with an examination of the solar returns of Iran for 2024, 2025, and 2026, which will bring us right up into current time and project a little bit forward into the future. Okay, thanks for your attention. Catch me later.